Good morning, everybody. The Simple Handicap for Monday, November 18th. Thank you for making me a part of your morning. I appreciate everybody's patience for the late upload on this episode. I had an accident on Saturday, working out with the trainer I'm with a couple times a week at the gym. Something went in my foot, and I didn't think much of it on Saturday, and I woke up Sunday morning around 4 a.m. to get ready for the day, and I had a fever going. My foot was swollen up. I couldn't stand on it. So I went to the ER shortly after, and it took a good 12 hours in the ER to go through the x-rays, to get into a room, to see the doctor. The place was absolutely full. And so I ended up watching the majority of the Sunday football slate, sitting in the emergency room in White Rock, and it was not the most pleasant Sunday by any means, consuming those games in that environment, especially with the Jets on the final drive. Had to do blood work as soon as Anthony Richardson was leading that final drive. So it's, I mean, to sit through that was pretty painful. And so it didn't end up getting back home until early in the first half for the Chargers-Bengals game on Sunday Night Football. The reason there's no video on this episode is because my foot is currently in an air cast, elevated on the couch. I have to figure out a setup to how I can fit at the desk and get that sorted out, as I'll be in this thing for a little while now. And so it's just been a weird Sunday. It was a good Sunday for the service, 1-0. It was good to finally have a winning week on the service after a couple losing weeks or break-even weeks. The last couple of weeks, after a very good September, October, and into November, not so good. And so it was good to get a positive week in the direction as we push forward to week number 12 after Monday Night Football tonight. And so rather than going through the full slate of games yesterday, I'm going to look forward to week 12, which I've been doing the majority of the work on so far. Did a recap on my side, but now this is more of a catch-up. We'll go team by team like we used to here on the pod in the Week 12 rotation, and then I'll mention any other thing that is worth bringing up, and we'll do a full catch-up again as we go throughout the week here on the podcast feed. So Thursday Night Football, things kick off for NFL Week number 12 with the Pittsburgh Steelers on the road at the Cleveland Browns. Pittsburgh was a 3.5-point favorite on the look-ahead. This number opened up 4.5, and we're back down to 3.5. The total in this game from 42 down to 39. There's a lot of things that you need to know about this game specifically. The biggest one is that this is going to be probably the first true weather game that we have seen, and that is why the total has already come down 3 points. Not only is it near freezing temperatures, but there is wind, albeit just shy of the 20-mile-per-hour mark that is so important, and there is a 75% chance of precipitation, which could be either rain or it could be snow, depending on the temperature. And of course, with this game being played in Cleveland, you have the effects from around the stadium, which tend to elevate some of the weather impact on games. And so with that forecast lingering around, this 42 has been bet under. And when you see a short total like that, and you have a number that's adjusted up, the dog, of course, is going to take money alongside of that in correlation with a total moving this much. Here's what I will say about this game specifically. When I look at the Pittsburgh Steelers and the way that they are playing, against the Baltimore Ravens, they had plenty of opportunities inside the red zone that they could not convert on. They end up scoring 18 points and escaping with the win, if you want to call it that, as Baltimore could not convert the 2-point conversion at the end of the game. But that was an offensive output from the Pittsburgh Steelers that should have warranted, based on the field positions and where they were, a lot more points than they ended up putting on the scoreboard. For the Cleveland Browns, they go on the road into New Orleans. They put up 400 yards. Jameis does not turn the ball over. They're never competitive in the game. Defensively, it was a complete disaster for Cleveland. And you're kind of getting the sense, at least I am, that there's some guys on that defensive side checking out a little bit. They suffered some more injuries on that side of the football. So where I'm going with this is both of these two teams profile at the moment, to me, more like over teams than they do under teams. And what's intriguing about this total from 42 now down to 39 is obviously there could be a significant weather impact on this game. The biggest driver of the three elements that are forecasted, the cold, the precipitation, and the wind, the biggest impact on this game is going to be the wind speed, which of the three was the least severe looking at the forecast on a Sunday evening. That could obviously change as we trend towards Thursday and the storm settles in and you get multiple models reporting it later today and into Tuesday. You get a better picture of it. But I'm looking at this total currently, and I'm just thinking about how Pittsburgh has played the last couple of weeks and what you're getting from Cleveland. This is obviously a short total here, less than 40 currently. if it is a cold game, which isn't like Miami, Kansas City last year at all, it's still going to be right around the freezing mark. It's forecasted in the 37 to 38 range for Fahrenheit. And you don't have that wind, and the rain is on and off throughout the game. Perhaps this ends up going back the other way. If the conditions get more severe and the wind ticks up, I get it. It's fully justified. And we could see this close around the mark of 38, and that would make a lot of sense. But these right now are two over teams that are seeing this total move towards the under because of the weather. And that is what we're getting in this spot. And so I'm curious to see how low this gets and what we have coming from weather forecasts and different models in the next couple of days. Getting over to Sunday, it's the Detroit Lions on the road at the Indianapolis Colts. And for the Lions, they just continue to roll. This team is just absolutely clicking and everything is going right. Jared Goff said postgame, everything is working, and he's 100% right. That was a performance, as we talked about last week, that was somewhat expected with Jacksonville. Still haven't fired Doug Peterson officially, but you could kind of see the quit coming. But Jared Goff finishes 16% above expectation. Perfect passer rating, 4 touchdowns, 400 yards, more than 650 yards total for the Lions. They score on 7 straight possessions to start the game. This was an absolute rout from start to finish, and they were never competitive. And what was, I think, interesting and important to take away from the game going forward is post-game, the Lions players were getting pressed a little bit by their own media as to why they were trying to run up the score. Because even when they were up 6 touchdowns, I mean, they were still getting guys on the field and running plays that you don't expect teams up in that scoreline to run. And the players in the locker room postgame were like, if you don't want us to do that, come in and play better football. So not only do you have the trio of coaches fully bought in, you have an offense clicking at an incredibly high level. The Lions are now the highest rated team in football in composite power ratings. They're the highest rated team in market ratings. I mean, everything is going right for the Lions. And you have the players adopting this mentality that we're going to keep running up the score and run up the margin. Where this starts to get interesting in this game specifically, we're starting to see a bit of a premium here put on the Lions, more so than what is warranted from a top team in the league. This game, prior to last week, if I'm looking at aggregate ratings, would have been Lions -8 on a neutral. We're now Lions -8 on the road, and it's a spot where Indy coming into the game against the Jets, the market was fading them. The Jets took money all week, and that was a Colts team that was right around 2.5 to 3 points below average in a lot of the aggregate ratings. I have a hard time not upgrading the Colts after what they did last week against the Jets in that game, where even though the Jets did end up getting the big lead, that was still a Colts offense that looked a lot better than anybody could have expected. And we saw Richardson look a lot like the Richardson when everything's clicking and going right that he could be, and the ceiling of what that offense for Indy could be with Steichen calling the plays. It was like everything was on display to work. And now this is a spot where Indy is obviously still trying right outside of the wild card picture, so you don't have any questions about motivation or effort. Any concerns I thought about, is this team quitting or checking out with the back and forth, I think were put to bed against that game in the Jets, especially with how they came back late in the game. They were still bought in. They were still fighting. How high does too high become for the Lions? And the only reason I'm saying I don't want to bet the Colts right now is because the Colts were faded last week in the market. But I do see 8 at DK. I do see 8 at BetOnline as well as Heritage. Everywhere else is still 7.5. Potentially does this get up to 8? That becomes kind of interesting to me. When you think about this Colts ground game, the Lions lost their green dot and their leader in the middle of the defense, Alex Anzalone, to a broken forearm. He's going to be out 6 to 8 weeks. So it's a Lions defense that, again, lost their best pass rusher a few weeks ago. They're now down their best linebacker. And this is a Colts team that can absolutely stress the linebacker position. And there's going to be a downgrade there for the Lions. So really kind of waiting to see what number we get from this, and if it does tick up a little bit higher than 7.5. Kansas City on the road at the Carolina Panthers. Chiefs out to an 11-point spread here on the road, up from 10 on the look-ahead line. Total 41.5. remains the same left to right across the screen. Kansas City falls short on the road at the Buffalo Bills, even without those star players. You didn't have Dalton Kincaid. You did not have Keon Coleman. The Buffalo Bills find a way and hang 30 points on the Kansas City Chiefs. An incredible run by Josh Allen on 4th and 2 late in the game to cover the point spread for the Bills. Chiefs can't come back. Chiefs cannot score. Bills get away with the win and the cover. Kansas City again is outgained by their opponent, albeit this time 0.2 yards per play. It was a game where I was surprised to see Buffalo, who was obviously, any team is going to be bought in against the Chiefs, but they looked superior at a lot of different positions. The Chiefs could not get a pass rush consistently. That was something that was different. They only had 4 pressures total. They only hit Allen twice. Couldn't keep contained on a lot of key downs. There was just a complete lack of pass rush, which was surprising. Even without the receivers, the wide receivers for Buffalo still outperformed the defensive backs for Kansas City. The Bills' pass rush was causing issues for Mahomes, especially at the tackle positions, which remain a problem. And when Kansas City needed to push the ball downfield, we saw the receivers outclassed at times by the opposing defensive backs for the Bills. And it was a game where the Bills had more of a matchup advantage than I certainly anticipated with those injuries going in. And you start to wonder here for Kansas City, with the issues at left and right tackle, with the issues beyond cornerback number 1 in the secondary, when they're facing top-level teams like Buffalo, and as we get into the playoffs and the competition steps up, are they going to be able to compete like they have in years past? This game made me look at the Kansas City Chiefs in a bit of a different light for how they played and just how they looked on field. For Buffalo, don't have a lot of negatives. That's Josh Allen cementing his MVP case so far through 11 weeks. That's great for some of the preseason futures. He gets his MVP moment on 4th and 2. It was as good as he could have looked in that spot for the Buffalo Bills. But we'll talk about the Bills a little bit later as they're on the bye. For now, we're focusing on the Kansas City Chiefs, who go into Carolina. The Panthers coming in off of their bye. And here's what stands out to me in this spot is obviously there's the Chiefs being bumped up off of the loss. I'm seeing them even as high as 11.5 at DraftKings. This is a big mismatch in terms of overall talent. It's a big mismatch in terms of coaching staff. It's obviously a gigantic mismatch in terms of quarterback on either side. For the Carolina Panthers, who have won 2 games in a row, this game out of the bye, they get guys back. Adam Thielen is going to be back. You would expect, at least I would, Brooks to be starting in the backfield, a long-awaited return for him. DJ Wonnum should, by all means, be back on the defensive side. And all of a sudden, this Panthers team, which has been banged up with injuries, unless there's another bizarre setback, and I feel like this has been something that's been talked about for several weeks in a row, but Carolina's handled it in a very unusual way. There's not really any excuse now to keep sitting these guys. So the Panthers are obviously rated right at the bottom of any ratings that you're looking at. But this is probably the best version of the Panthers' offense and defense from just player name value that will be on the field against the Chiefs that we have seen at any point this entire season. So should the Chiefs be getting upgraded like this as we're seeing it in the market, with that being the case? I think it's a fair question to ask, and similar to Detroit Indy, kind of just looking on the sidelines here and waiting to see what we get at. I know there's going to be folks listening that cringe at the idea of backing the Carolina Panthers against Patrick Mahomes and the Kansas City Chiefs. If this keeps ticking up and all of those names come back for Carolina, this is pushing the boundaries of what this number and this price could be. Minnesota on the road at the Chicago Bears. Minnesota from a 4.5-point favorite on the look ahead, down to 3.5, total from 41 down to 40, and even as low as 39.5 at Circa Sports. This was another one of the couple games this week where endgame scenarios did not fall my way. Minnesota ends up leading Tennessee by 10. Titans have 2 different drives, and they cannot score drives on either at the end of the game. It was a spot where the Vikings looked comfortable. There was nothing that jumped off the stat sheet in a major way. I look at Sam Darnold's performance, and it was right around average, 3% above expectation. That's middle of the pack for the week. He was willing to push the ball downfield a little bit further than what we've seen him. He didn't make mistakes like he has the last couple of weeks with 2 touchdowns, no interceptions, but it wasn't a massive game for Jefferson. It wasn't a massive game for Addison outside of the 1 touchdown catch. There just wasn't a lot on the stat sheet that would lead you to look at Minnesota as breaking back to what they were early in the season. It was a 23-13 win where the Vikings just got over 318 yards, but were outgained by 0.6 yards per play at the end of it. And so in many cases, the Titans were at times the more explosive team as they out-yard per play the Vikings, but the Titans were just far too inconsistent against this defense, which was a very fair criticism of the Titans coming in and a point for the Vikings to have with Flores against Levis and forcing him into mistakes with some of that pressure, especially as the game got towards the end. But neither team could run the football whatsoever against the opposing defense, and it was the Vikings outlasting the Tennessee Titans despite being outgained in that spot. Chicago, on the other hand, I think proved a lot of things wrong that were assumed of them coming into this game with just the multitude of rumors and quit allegations and the last couple of weeks we've seen from them and how problematic everything was. From an offensive perspective, we knew Thomas Brown was going to come in. We knew he was going to push the ball on the ground. We knew he was going to slow things down a little bit, and that was certainly the case. It was 391 yards total offense for the Chicago Bears. It was 179 of those coming on the ground. Williams leads a great drive late to set up the Bears for the game-winning field goal. They're at a spot where they're finally going to knock off the Packers. The streak is over. They finally get the win, and then the kick is blocked. And now the Bears are 4-6, very much on the outside looking in with their playoff hopes nearly all but done. And now it's a situation of what comes next for Chicago. Massive game in the division for both teams. And this is a spot where the market has taken to Chicago, at least early on. I have a hard time getting all the way to sharing that same sentiment because I still look at this Bears defense, which was so good early in the year, having yet another game where a lot of issues and a lot of struggles. And it's not like the Packers had to do a whole lot. Jordan Love only threw 17 pass attempts. Green Bay in total ran just 43 plays. But they put up 8.5 yards per play on this Bears defense, which was so good early in the season. And it's just multiple long passes to Christian Watson, Bears blowing assignments. It reminds me a little bit of that, not to the same extent, but obviously that Arizona game, I think, left a lot of concerns with the Chicago Bears, as did the Pats game. And then in this spot, you just wonder how the Bears are able to come back and rebound from this. The market is hinting that they will in this spot, but I do wonder how much of that is this kind of floating sentiment here for Minnesota, now a third road game in a row. Narrowly get by the Jags in a game they should have looked a whole lot better. They followed it up against the Titans, as we talked about, with the game that perhaps should have looked a little bit better for Tennessee than it did on the scoreboard. And now it's just a bit of a tough spot with this third game in a row for Minnesota on the road, and now going into Chicago, where we saw the Bears show at least signs of life, which they didn't the previous 3 weeks. And so that's really kind of how I'm looking at this. And I've really struggled with opinions on the Vikings the last couple of weeks. And a similar sentiment exists with opinions on the Bears, although I feel like I've probably handled the situation around the Bears quite well, but there's been a lot of difficulty to get in and back them or oppose them. And this is another week where I'm looking at this game and I just don't have too much of a take in this spot. Dallas on the road at Washington is still off of the board. Tampa Bay on the road at the New York Giants. Buccaneers 3-point favorites across the board, total from 43.5 down to 43 and trending lower. News to watch for the Giants is whether or not Drew Lock will be starting at quarterback, as the Giants lost to Carolina and went into the bye. Based on how Brian Daboll was wording things, he seems certainly open to making a change at quarterback. Let's see what comes through with that. Perhaps later today, we'll hear more from him and this Giants team and get a better understanding of what they are going to do for Tampa Bay. All news is looking at Mike Evans, who was targeted to return in this week when the injury initially happened to him. I've been looking back and forth between a lot of Twitter doctors and reports around the team as the Buccaneers are coming in off of the bye, and there's speculation that it's around a 50-50 shot for him to play, a very high re-injury risk. We've seen teams around the league handle some of these hamstring injuries with a lot of caution. So waiting to see what happens with Tampa Bay, but having him back would be a big boost. This is a spot where Tampa Bay and their offensive line, which lost Tristan Wirfs, is going to have a big challenge against this New York Giants defensive line. The one strength that the Giants have on either side of the football is on that defensive side. The Buccaneers defense has turned in to be quite a big over defense in the last couple of weeks. But what are you getting from the quarterback position for the Giants? Does it change your opinion if you get Drew Lock willing to push the football around the field and sling it like he has in his career so far compared to what you're going to get from Daniel Jones in this spot? That's a big question to ask, and if you feel one way or the other, you might be looking at this total. If you do think Drew Lock is going to start as being potentially a little bit short, if you think he brings back that mentality that he has had in this spot. So that's something that I'm certainly keeping my eye on today when it comes to news. New England on the road at the Miami Dolphins, 7.5 was the look ahead for Miami. That is now down to 7. The Dolphins win comfortably against the Las Vegas Raiders, a game I paid very little attention to and one I have to go back and look through to get a better understanding of what happened. But as I look through the box score very briefly, without doing a big dive into the media or anything that happened post-game, as I'm looking at just some of the numbers, it was a game that finished 34-19 that just from a box score appeal and high-level standpoint suggests it could have been a little bit tighter. And so perhaps a bit of a Dolphins win that was exaggerated by the final scoreline for the Pats. A game against the LA Rams where they lose by 6. The Rams cover, but quite frankly, when you look at the box score, and it was a game that I spent a lot of time watching, that was pretty dominant from the LA Rams. 7.9 yards per play to 5.2 for the Pats. They're outgained by a ton. The Pats' pass defense allows 11 yards per pass to Stafford and company and couldn't get any stops in the red zone when it mattered. If I'm a fan of the New England Patriots, and I'm somebody who might be considering betting on them this week, the positive takeaway from that game for New England is the performance that you're getting from Drake May. He finishes 11.2% above expectation, the third best mark of the week behind Geno Smith and Jared Goff, completes 75% of his passes. It was a very good performance again from Drake May, and it was Sean McVay postgame talking about how good he looked on the field. I couldn't help but notice so many comments throughout the game that were made from film guys about how good he looked in this offense and how this offense is continuing to come around. When I'm looking at this game specifically, New England is a team, although they are at 3-8, when I think about the other teams that are sitting in the AFC with similar records, like the Jets, who are completely dead, like the Cleveland Browns, who look very much like a team that is checked out and dead, like the Jags, who are on the brink of firing their coach, and the Raiders, who are completely lost. To me, the Pats are this team in the AFC that still is actively pushing during games each week. There is motivation to get wins, and that's coming from ownership and Robert Kraft to justify the coaching change that was made in the offseason, moving on from the best coach of all time. Mayo is trying to push that as well. And so the Pats are a team that you're going to get a fighting effort from as long as everybody stays healthy. And this is a game potentially, too, where you get more help and more health on the defensive line as well up front for the Pats. So it makes sense to me to see just a little bit of an adjustment here on the side. When it comes to the total, the Pats defense continues to struggle. Drake May looks very much like an over quarterback. On the other side, you have the Miami Dolphins, who keep playing overs with Tua healthy, looking like a offense that still might not be fully priced in correctly to the market. Now, this week, we've already seen a 2.5-point adjustment on the total. It's moving up. It's getting to the point where I think it should be and makes a lot more sense in this range than in the lower 40s. So the market's certainly accounting for this so far, but just wanted to bring that up to round out the picture of what you're looking at for this game. Tennessee, Houston still off of the board with the Texans playing on Monday Night Football. Would also say, as that comes to mind, a Nico Collins anytime touchdown scorer at even money or better is a ticket that I have in my account, and that would be one that I think is worth putting in yours as well when it comes to Monday Night Football against the Dallas Cowboys. Denver Broncos on the road at the Las Vegas Raiders. Broncos from 3 on the look ahead out to 5, minus 15 total from 41 up to 41.5. Everything that we talked about all week went well for the Denver Broncos exactly as expected. That is a Falcons defense that they faced, which has zero pass rush ability and is just a major issue for them. And we'll talk about that going forward. But it was a perfect setup for the Denver Broncos. They have their great offensive line playing at home against a team that cannot rush the passer. And that's what you're going to get. That's how it's going to look when the offensive line for the Broncos can win, when Bo Nix is comfortable, when he's not pressured. That's what you're going to get. An 84% completion percentage, 7.3% above expectation, 4 touchdowns, no picks, 307 total. Great game from Nix. Great game from the Broncos. And when they can lean on that offensive line up front against an inferior pass rush on the other side, they're going to be able to score. And this pressure that they're able to generate up front is a big problem for other quarterbacks too. They're blitzing a ton. When they blitz, they get home. And we saw Atlanta really struggle with that. And we saw Kirk Cousins really struggle with that. And the Broncos end up outgaining the Falcons by 2.7 yards per play. Denver goes over 400 total yards of offense, 8.7 per pass, and 4.0 per rush. A perfect 4 for 4 in the red zone as the Broncos win and cover. Matched up against the Las Vegas Raiders, when you look at the Raiders pass rush, it's a much different story from the Atlanta Falcons. The Raiders on the season, the pass rush win rate of 50%. That's second best in the NFL. It is a run-stop win rate for the Raiders of 33%. That's top 10 in the NFL as well. So the Raiders' defense is going to pose a lot more of a challenge up front for this Broncos offensive line than what they were tested with from the Falcons. The Broncos getting bought for yet another week, I think, is quite telling. We saw them take a lot of money last week, right around Sunday night into Monday as well. That game moved about 4 points. We're already seeing the 2-point move here. Everybody wants a piece of the Denver Broncos, and it makes sense at the moment, given how they're looking up front against some of these opponents. For Las Vegas and what they bring defensively, it is a different test, certainly for them. Now, for the Las Vegas Raiders offense, you start to question whether they're going to get away with, because it is a Raiders offensive line that is struggling to get consistent pass blocking. They're suspect to pressure, and certainly whether it is Minshew or if they happen to make a change at quarterback this week, we don't know what we're getting from Pierce on any given week. That's going to look really tough. And even with the offensive coaching staff change going into Miami, all the emphasis was on running the football and getting back to the run game, and it was Pierce pushing it, and that was the whole plan. The Raiders end up throwing it 43 times to just 16 rush attempts. Myers, as a wide receiver, leads the team in rushing yards with 1 carry for 20 yards. Madison has just 19 total. Zamir White has 9 total rush yards. There is no run game at all for the Las Vegas Raiders. So in this matchup, it is going to be that offensive line against the aggression and the pass rush that the Broncos have likely all game, because the Raiders are just inept at running the football, and they have been all season. And I wouldn't expect that to change in this spot. And so while I don't want to say that it is a similar matchup for the Broncos, who are now again back on the road, and it's a different caliber of pass rush for the Raiders, certainly than what they faced with the Falcons, but it's another game where the Broncos defense up front is going to give the opponent a lot of trouble. Is that worth the full extent of this move? It's a question I don't have the answer for, and I don't really have an opinion on this game, but that is something to think about when you're looking at the matchup spot between these two teams. Arizona on the road at the Seattle Seahawks. Seahawks a 1-point favorite on the look ahead. They open as a 1-point favorite, but we see Circa and Buckeye get down to a pick'em along with Bet Online, as the Arizona Cardinals were a very popular team in market a couple weeks pre-bye. with the one exception really being that Jets game where the Jets took money and completely no-showed. But this is now a Seahawks team that looks completely rejuvenated. They get the monkey off their back, beating the San Francisco 49ers. It was something that has haunted Geno Smith in his time with the team. It was redemption for the Thursday night loss. It was a late drive that gets the Seahawks in the end zone with under 15 seconds left. Seattle as a whole ends up matching the offensive output for the 49ers. This was dead even, 4.9 yards per play per side, 5.4 yards per pass, and then narrowly outgained per rush. Seattle converted on both of their red zone opportunities. And it was really the one mistake from Geno in the whole game was coming out of halftime where he's scrambling around and he makes a bad decision that gets picked off and returned and sets up a short field score for San Francisco. But the news and kind of the noise that comes from this game is post-game, the 2 Seattle touchdown drives, which took place late in the third quarter and then on the final drive of the game, they both came after Bosa went down for the 49ers and was out of the game. He was causing so much trouble for this offensive line and this offense as a whole. He goes out. The Seahawks go 11 plays for 70, 10 plays for 33, which gets stopped twice. Just 2 brutal stops inside San Francisco territory. 3rd and 1, Geno picked up the first down. He was spotted short, and then Charbonnet was stuffed. That was a sequence where the Seahawks down 17-13 midway through the fourth quarter, should have got the first down and kept driving, and then they go 11 plays, 80 yards to get the game-winning touchdown with 12 seconds left on a Geno scramble. But all of the offense for Seattle happened after the injury. Now, against the Arizona Cardinals, a step down in terms of caliber of opposing defense. And I wonder how just a week of prep that is going to be far less disruptive than what the Seahawks had coming out of the bye, perhaps set them up in a different way, returning home to host the Cardinals in just a massive game in the NFC West. And so think about the Seahawks week. They start the week off on Monday by cutting their leading tackler, Dotson. Thursday, out of nowhere, they have their starting center retire. It was a week out of the bye that no team ever wants to go through. And the fact that Seattle, while making changes and trying to get the defense right, went through all of it, go into San Francisco, are struggling, and managed to overcome and get the win. I thought that was a huge point in the season for the Seahawks that could potentially turn things around. In this matchup against Arizona, they have a spot where they have to win to keep the season alive. They face the Cardinals 2 of the next 3 weeks with the Jets sandwiched in between. But this is another game for Seattle that is the full all-in effort. And I thought defensively, even without Kittle, which could be, again, another point that you look at in that Seahawks game saying, well, they shouldn't have won that game to begin with, and they only benefited when Bosa was out. And then defensively, they looked better than they were because Seattle or San Francisco didn't have Kittle, which is always a big problem for the Seahawks in this scheme. Perhaps that's one way to look at it and take away, and which is why you're seeing the Cardinals coming out of the bye, who are red hot at the moment with Kyler Murray playing exceptional football, taking money initially, and why we might see this get to pick 'em, or perhaps we see Arizona get to a 1.5 point favorite. It's kind of hard for me to decipher which side of the line I'm on because I'm looking at Geno in that performance, 16.3% above expectation, number 1 mark of the week. He has Abe Lucas back on the offensive line, potential for other guys to get a little bit healthier too in this spot. A little bit torn on this game, if I'm being completely honest. Total from 48 down to 47.5. Then we go San Francisco on the road at the Green Bay Packers. Packers a 1.5 point favorite with a total of 47.5. We've talked about both of these teams a little bit so far. I don't have any take at the moment on this game. I'm struggling with the Packers right now and what they are as a team. You can argue they got on quite a lucky break to beat the Bears, but again, that box score was a little bit misleading, certainly. And then you have the 49ers who just couldn't get stops once Bosa went down, and that was a game where arguably they got a little bit unlucky. I just don't know what to take away from those two games. I I just struggle to kind of price Green Bay at the moment. It's a game I need to think more about. I just don't have much of an opinion on this one at the moment. Sunday Night Football, it's the Philadelphia Eagles on the road at the Los Angeles Rams. Eagles, a 3-point favorite on the look ahead, reopen as 3. We're seeing 2.5 showing at circa. Everywhere else, 3 across the board. Total from 48. Reopens at 48 everywhere except for Chris, which is at 47.5. Stafford was amazing on the road at New England. An awesome game from him to get the win and to keep the Rams' playoff hopes alive. It's another game where you're obviously going to get an all-in effort from the Rams for the Philadelphia Eagles. They end up beating a Washington team 26-18. It was a game that they trailed at the half, ended up scoring 20 points in the fourth quarter to pull away and beat Washington. All of the commentary that came away from the Eagles, film guys, from film experts watching the game, was about how great the Eagles' defense is becoming. This seems to very much be that Fangio week 10, 11, 12 window when he's taken over teams in the past, where everything comes together, where everything clicks. You've got young guys standing out in the secondary. You've got great linebacker play. It's freeing up the defensive line. And they just took over the game and dominated Washington. I do want to point out that Jaden Daniels is clearly playing hurt, and he is not 100%. And I think that went some part of the way to making Philadelphia look a little bit better defensively in a standalone game that everybody was watching than perhaps they really are. I'm not trying to take away from what the Eagles' defense is, but I do think that is important to keep in mind context-wise when you think about that performance against the Commanders, who were held in such high regard. The box score certainly supported the Eagles, 6.2 to 4.2 yards per play. Philly put up 440 yards of offense. I mean, the Eagles' offense playing late in second halves when they have the lead and they're able to stack points like that is dominant. And certainly with the missed field goals in the first half, there were points that were left off on the board. They also had a very big drive at the end of the first half where they had to settle for 3. Same thing happened in the third quarter early, where it was another long drive for a field goal. So there was a lot of noise, I would say, in the Eagles' performance, in which they went 1 for 3 in the red zone, missed a couple of kicks as well to get to 26. Could have looked a lot better, certainly. Where I'm going with this is in this matchup where I see the total adjusted down a half point. It's the Eagles going into LA, playing indoors against a defense that, for the Rams, is very suspect to defending play action, is very suspect to defending the run game, that isn't overwhelming and dominant in terms of pressure outside of one pass rusher. This is a game where I would expect, again, for the Eagles offense to show really well. And I do think with Barkley and with these wide receivers and Hurts, putting them indoors on turf and speeding them up is certainly a positive. This feels to me like a very good spot for the Eagles offense. But if there is some level of the Eagles defense being slightly overrated at all in this spot, because they played a hurt Jaden Daniels, because they played the Cowboys after they lose Dak Prescott and they go Cooper Rush and Trey Lance, because they played a dead Jaguars team, because they played the Cincinnati Bengals, because they played the Giants and the Browns, where the Giants may have a different quarterback and the Browns started a quarterback who's no longer starting for the team. The Bengals game, certainly the exception in that spot, but 5 of the last 6 weeks for the Eagles has certainly been quite favorable competition. Going into LA and playing this Rams offense and playing Matthew Stafford is a much different caliber of opponent. So while I think the Eagles offense is going to show well, if the Eagles defense is slightly overrated and there is this sentiment coming out of Thursday that they're peaking and should be priced higher rating-wise than what they are, and that's why we're seeing this total adjust down, there could possibly be some value to come on this over based on how it sets up. And so I would have expected this game to be bet over right after open, and the fact that it hasn't is a little bit surprising to me at the moment. And I'm even seeing At a place like FanDuel, the 47.5 is shaded to the under. Same thing at Heritage, as they're mirroring that price. There's a lot of numbers on the board that are shaded lower than going back the other direction at the moment that I am recording. And so that's something that I'm certainly keeping my eye on with this Sunday night total. And then Monday Night Football, don't have a full market on this game. No Chris, no Circa, no Buckeye, no FanDuel. This was Ravens -3. I would expect this to open below the 3, total from 48. I would expect that to open right around the same mark as well, as we saw against the Cincinnati Bengals in the game which was released on the service. Even in a game where the Chargers weren't pushed in the first half, with the Bengals settling for field goals, that offense looks great in its current form, with Herbert playing as well as he has, and his legs, as we talked about, very live and give a completely different dimension to this offense. And that could be something that Roman continues to push, and that's a big positive. You have no shortage of storylines between Harbaugh playing against his brother, between Roman playing against his old team. I mean, there is endless storylines in this game to look at. The Baltimore Ravens lose on the road at the Pittsburgh Steelers. It was as bad of a game from Lamar as you're ever going to see, 13.8% below expectation. Hold on to the ball for nearly 3.5 seconds per play. The Steelers were throwing all sorts of looks at them, and although it wasn't that different from what they threw at Washington, it just felt like the Ravens and Lamar just weren't prepared for it, and they didn't have an answer for it, which was a little bit surprising to me. So much familiarity, so many storylines. It's going to be an awesome game. Very curious to see what we get from a full market when this is open a little bit later today. So just quickly kind of going back through the board, I don't have a bet on the Thursday Night Football total. It's something I'm keeping my eye on because it is going to be such a weather-impacted game. I would say the Colts as an underdog, if that number gets up, becomes tempting to me, as might, and that's a big might, Carolina. We'll see how high that goes to, and some of those guys that might potentially come back. I have no opinion right now on Minnesota, Chicago. We don't have a number for Dallas, Washington. Tampa Bay and New York, there's some QB news to watch. There's the Mike Evans news to watch. New England, Miami, that total has certainly been bet up. Hasn't gone far enough up yet with how the Pats and Drake May are looking like an over, and the Dolphins playing as they are. Tennessee, Houston, nothing full yet for a market. The Broncos have been adjusted up in a pretty big way. Not much there. Arizona, Seattle's a wait and see. San Francisco, Green Bay is a wait and see. Sunday Night Football, Eagles, Rams. That total keeps coming down. I would be very intrigued by the over. And then Monday Night Football, not a full market up yet on that one. So one or two sides, one or two totals potentially that I might be interested in. Other than that, it looks like a much tighter week than what we had last week in Week 11, where there were a lot of intriguing sides to look at. And we will see what comes of this week and how we go. Again, I appreciate everybody for having the patience and dealing with what was likely a click or two and a scroll or two to try to figure out where the video and the live stream was yesterday. I apologize for keeping you guys hanging if you were waiting around for it and you couldn't find it and you were a little bit frustrated by that. It was just a bad situation and a bad day, and a lot of pain and a lot of Advil going through to kind of keep things with the good old Rice method of the rest, ice, compress, and elevate. So a few weeks rather of pain ahead my way that I will manage to get through just fine, but good to get the pod back here at close to the reasonable hour and get you on your way this Monday morning. Appreciate everybody for stopping by. Have a fantastic Monday, everybody. We'll talk to you again tomorrow morning, bright and early, here on the podcast feed.